The African Academy of Languages of the African Union, ACALAN AU, as the African Union's specialized language agency, mandated to develop and promote African languages and to provide technical support to member states of the African Union for the formulation and implementation of language policies and strategies of language development and use, held a webinar on July 15, 2021. The main objective of the webinar was to develop advocacy strategies for the Salaam framework for action and to draw a plan of action for the promotion of Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa. The webinar was, amongst others, attended by specialists and experts in Kiswahili, including the Acting Executive Secretary of the East Africa Kiswahili Commission, Kamisheniya Kiswahili Afrika Mashariki, KAKAMA, the Acting Executive Secretary of the Kiswahili Council of Tanzania, Baraza la Kiswahili la Taifa, BAKITA, the Director of the Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy, members of the ACALAN Kiswahili Vehicular Cross-Border Language Commission, and representatives of ACALAN's national structures in the member states where Kiswahili is spoken, stakeholders and representatives of the regional and international organizations dealing with the development and promotion of African languages, and the ACALAN Secretariat. The following speakers gave short remarks during the opening session. ACALAN's Kiswahili Vehicular Cross-Border Language Commission Coordinator, Professor John Kiango, the President of the ACALAN Assembly of Academicians, Professor Sami Bebanchombo, and the ACALAN Executive Secretary, Dr. Lang Fafa Damfa. All the three speakers welcomed participants and commended them for their commitment, while urging them to make reflections that would lead us to develop strategies for the implementation of the framework within the member states of the African Union. Dr. Damfa said that the objective of the webinar was to develop advocacy strategies for the implementation of the Salaam framework for action.
The Salaam framework for action, we all know this document, as Dr. Ojo has just said, was prepared in 2019 by the African Academy of Languages based in Bamako, Mali here, in collaboration with KAKAMA and BAKITA. And when I say ACALAN, that means our working structures and organs. And of course, with UNESCO, UNESCO played an important role in the preparation of this document because the UNESCO regional office in Tanzania was present all through and contributed and pledged UNESCO's support in promoting Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa. Now, this was done through an international meeting that ACALAN convened in Dar es Salaam. I think it was 26 to 28 June 2019, in which African experts, I said it, and specialists of the Kiswahili language, representatives of ACALAN's national structures in the member states of the African Union in which Kiswahili is spoken, members of ACALAN's Kiswahili Vehicular Cross-Border Language Commission, representatives of the East African Kiswahili Commission, Kamisheniya Kiswahili Afrika Mashariki, KAKAMA, and the UNESCO office, as I said, in the United Republic of Tanzania, the Global Association for the Promotion of Kiswahili, that is Chama cha Ukuza wa Kiswahili Duniani, cha UKIDU, and Swahili media and experts were all present. This document was prepared as a framework, an action, a recall to the member states of the African Union that Article 29 and 25 of the Charter and subsequently the Constitutive Act of the African Union of the Transformation be implemented, because that article says that the working languages of the institution, the African Union, and the organization and all its institutions shall be, if possible, African languages, and English, French, and Portuguese. So the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action is here to make this, if possible, possible, and to choose this language that we all know the potentials of uniting Africa, of liberating Africa. This language, which is an African language, because it is a Bantu language with terms from Arabic and other Bantu languages, to be used as a language of wider communication so that the African people can speak with one voice, can use their own language or languages during their meetings, can use their own language or languages as languages of instruction in the media, etc. So what we intend to do, ACALAN, generally, is to take this Dar es Salaam Framework for Action to the specialized technical committee that is taking place in November 2021 for adoption for the aspects of the Dar es Salaam Framework to be implemented. After this adoption, it will be taken to the summit for further adoption to become a policy document. And then ACALAN and its partners would start the effective promotion of Kiswahili as a language of wider communication. And the importance of this meeting today is to try to look at strategies that we intend to do, action plans that we intend to take to promote Kiswahili, to have Kiswahili accepted as a language of wider communication in Africa, and to try to use Kiswahili as a subject and a language of instruction in the member states of the African Union where Kiswahili is not spoken. So the Dar es Salaam Framework, we have to document, and when we go back, when we finish this meeting, we can look at it. The terms are there. We are leaning on Agenda 2063 of the African Union, the Charter for the African Cultural Renaissance, the Statutes of the African Academy of Languages, ACALAN, the Language Plan of Action for Africa, the Revised Language Plan of Action for Africa, the Harare Intergovernmental Conference 1997, the Decade for Education in Africa, and also the African Charter for Popular Participation in Development and Transformation, also the 2006 Year of African Languages. So let's look at the ways and means of effectively promoting Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa, especially in the member states in which Kiswahili is spoken. I think we have an advantage in the sense that if we take Southern Africa, Kiswahili is now taking root in these countries, and it's been used in radio programs, it's been used as subject and the language of instruction, it's been used in the media, etc. So the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action is a collective commitment for African governments to promote Kiswahili, implement this article of the Charter that says that African languages will be used as languages of communication, official languages, etc. Thank you very much.
He continued to say that the framework is a policy document to recognize and promote Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa. He said that the framework would be presented to the next Specialized Technical Committee, Youth, Culture and Sport 4 in October 2021 for adoption by the Honourable Ministers of Culture, Youth and Sport, and then to the Executive Council, and then will be presented to the heads of state and government in February 2022 for adoption during the summit. He concluded by informing the participants that ACALAN is preparing to launch the African Languages Week in Ouagadougou by the end of July as a major annual event. In the plenary session, Dr. Damfa made a brief presentation of the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action and its adoption strategy, followed by comments and proposals of participants on how the document can become a force majeure. The chairperson of the session, Professor Sami Beban-Chombo, said that the working languages of the African Union have always been English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. The only African language, now that Kiswahili is being promoted by ACALAN as a language of wider communication in Africa, alongside Arabic. It should be seen as an opportunity to be made possible by all positive means. The linguistic and paralinguistic factors to make this happen and the gain or advantage when it happens should be a major consideration. If Kiswahili is to become the first African language south of the Sahara to be used as a working language of the African Union, the questions to ask are: which strategy to employ? How will it be implemented? What should the member states do? He then urged participants to quickly develop strategies to promote the Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa. Fikeni E.M.K. Senkoro, a renowned linguist and an expert in the Kiswahili language, professor at the University of Dar es Salaam and the Institute of Kiswahili Research in Dar es Salaam, expressed the opinion that to have Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa, we have to take into account grassroots participation. He concluded saying that wider membership promoting Kiswahili, increased cyber presence of Kiswahili through the creation of online TVs and radios and so on are required. Dr. Kiprot Lagat, Director of Culture in the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, ACALAN's national structure in Kenya, said that during the last meeting of the 12 heads of state of the East African community, they committed themselves to promote culture. He proposed an advocacy campaign as well as having the national structures to play their role in the promotion of the use of African languages, especially Kiswahili, in education. He concluded that the interface between Ministries of Culture and Education is very important and should be encouraged. Dr. James Otieno, Acting Executive Secretary of the East Africa Kiswahili Commission, Kamisheniya Kiswahili, Afrika, Mashariki, KAKAMA, expressed the view that both ACALAN and KAKAMA should implement the program through collaborative efforts and proposed a joint meeting to be organized by the two institutions. Kimani Njogu, former Associate Professor of Kiswahili and African Languages at Kenyatta University, Nairobi, notable expert and advocate of the Kiswahili language and member of the ACALAN Kiswahili Vehicular Cross-Border Language Commission, said that the place of culture is not well understood by many African governments, and therefore a position paper should be developed by the experts which should show that without the African economy driven by culture, Africa will not move forward. He urged that ACALAN drive this program of developing a position paper on culture. For the funding of the implementation of the framework, the question as to where the money will come from was raised by Baye Mekonnen, Professor of Linguistics and Philology at the Addis Ababa University and a member of the ACALAN Assembly of Academicians. He posited that the member states should have Kiswahili taught in schools like Amharic is done in Ethiopia, and for that, money is a key factor. Dr. Damfa expressed the view that the African Union has a culture division, and the African Academy of Languages, ACALAN, is placed under this culture division, both attached to the Department of Social Development, Culture and Sport, and therefore any strategic document on the broad aspect of culture should be developed by the Culture Division, with ACALAN contributing the language component of the document. It was recommended that the Vehicular Cross-Border Language Commissions, the Kiswahili Council of Tanzania, BAKITA and UNESCO should be part of the advocacy campaign for the implementation of the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action. ACALAN and KAKAMA should play a greater role in the process by jointly implementing the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action. The adoption of the framework and strategy should be made at continental level, and all the AU documents should be translated systematically into Kiswahili. A strategy for financing the program should be worked out, and ACALAN working structures should be central to it and play a role in the sensitization campaigns. ACALAN should be transformed to an African Academy of Culture and Languages, ACLC, because the two components cannot be separated, and it will also help in facilitating their works. Kiswahili should be taught in schools and be inscribed in the constitutions of the member states. Young people should be targeted through social media while increasing the presence of Kiswahili in the cyberspace, on online radio and TV, and so on, and ACALAN should collaborate with organizations that promote Kiswahili in the cyberspace. Sensitization meetings should be organized with the regional economic communities with a view to getting them to support the advocacy campaign of the Framework for Action according to the provision of the Language Plan of Action for Africa. The Language Plan of Action for Africa was developed in 1984, adopted in 1986 by the Organization of African Unity, revised in 2006 by the African Union. It has, however, not been fully implemented yet, and therefore should be assessed in view of revising and bringing new elements into it, such as the attributes of the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action. A side event in the forthcoming summit to identify a champion for African languages should be programmed. Grassroots participation should be encouraged in the implementation of the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action. Regional economic communities should be taken on board so that they are aware of the importance of African languages, especially Kiswahili, as a key and factor of African integration and development. ACALAN should organize meetings in each region from next year to discuss the aspects and implementation of the Dar es Salaam Framework for Action. There is a need for each country to have a policy framework and the national structure to work with ACALAN. The Dar es Salaam Framework for Action should be printed and distributed to member states. There is a need for the member states to do advocacy and lobby at the regional economic community and national levels. Steering committee was set up to look at all that was discussed and come up with a draft document to be submitted to the Ministers of Culture during the next Specialized Technical Committee Youth, Culture and Sport 4. The committee members selected are Professor John Kiango, Coordinator, Professor Fikeni M. K. Senkoro, Dr. Juma Longo, Professor Kimani Njogu, Ms. Caroline Aslimwe, Ms. Consolata Musi. The main outcome was the strategies for a plan of action for the promotion of Kiswahili as a language of wider communication in Africa were developed.